status. I will be looking
Broadcasting from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and airing on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Welcome to The Gailey Show, the only daily LGBTQ progressive radio news and talk show in the United States for as long as those states are united. I am your host, John Barker. Today is our weekly Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly episode, where we sit down with a guest for the majority of the episode to help us think more clearly and more queerly on the major issues of the day facing the queer and allied community. After that, I'll continue my Queer in the Cosmos essay series. Of course, there's lots of news happening in the world, so this is our opportunity where we take a step back to process and take a look at it. But we've got the best in progressive news and analysis coming up for you in Minneapolis. The Matt McNeil Show on AM 950 radio happens right after us. And if you're in Chicago, Choose Views with Richard Chu will be on WCPT 820. Today, we're taking a look back, as we have been with a variety of guests since June. We're taking a look back at the 6 months of neo-fascism that we've been living through as we look to survive the next 3.5 years. My goal is friend of the Gailey Show, David Reddish, who is the lead anchor / commentator of Occupy Democrats TV. He is also the entertainment co-host of the Left of Straight show. He is a Rotten Tomatoes accredited critic and the author of The Passion of Sergius and Bacchus and the excellent Sex, Drugs, and Superhero series. David, welcome back to the show.
Hey, JP. It's great to see you, man. It's great to be back.
Yeah. All right. So I guess in a word or in a sentence or not yet a novel, what has been your take on the last 6 months of fun?
I mean, predictable chaos. How is that for you? It's definitely being chaotic, but the thing about the chaos is that we all kind of should have known that it was coming. There were so many warning signs, everything from Project 2025 to, Trump's first term, which was filled with this kind of chaos. It's complete chaos, and I fear it's only going to get worse.
So you're speaking of Project 2025, which was widely known. We could all read it. I don't know if you went through it. I went through it. It was scary as hell. And I think I can say hell. Thank you, FCC. But I'm still figuring out what all the curse words are because I need so many of them. But I guess my question I want to put to you then is it as bad as we thought? Because we all knew that Project 2025 was bad. Or has it been even worse from your perspective?
I think it's interesting, I guess, the timing of you asking me that question, because I guess in my view, it's been bad, but it's also been ineffectual, which is yet another hallmark of the Trump presidency, both in his first term and sort of everything else in his life. This is not someone who's a skilled businessman. He just plays one on reality television, right? True story. But the thing that frightens me is last Friday, he signed into law this budget abomination, which is going to cause so much more chaos. So many people are going to lose their health care. They're going to lose their health care subsidies. They're going to lose access to food. Rural hospitals, I'm from a town of 2,000 people. So I keep wondering, are the hospitals there going to be okay? Because they get all these federal subsidies to stay open. They're going to close. I know others have closed preemptively before the funding's even been caught off. And on top of all of that, they're pouring billions of dollars into ICE. So I don't know if you and your listeners are familiar, but the ICE raids that have been going on for the past 6 months have essentially bankrupted the agency. They're way out of money, but now they have all this new cash, flowing into their coffers. So I fear we're going to see a lot more ICE raids, and they're all over the country on much larger scales.
You're based in Los Angeles. Can you give us a little bit of insight into the from either your reporting or just as a human living in LA of the protests that were happening and the aggressiveness that ICE has been doing? I mean, people are literally afraid to come out of their homes.
Well, that's a great question. And to that point about people afraid to come out of their homes, I saw a Fox News commentator, I think it was this morning, actually, talking about how traffic in Los Angeles has been cured thanks to ICE raids. It has not been cured. We still have hideous traffic in this city. It's just now taken up with a bunch of guys in masks driving around in black SUVs. In terms of the protest that we saw last month, I attended the No Kings protest. We had like a dozen around the city, I think 12, 16, something like that, which was really encouraging. I saw them in my neighborhoods. I went over to West Hollywood, and the whole city was essentially shut down because the protests were so big. People were caught in traffic by people flooding into the streets, and they didn't seem to mind, surprisingly. As far as the downtown protests, there was some violence, but one of the elements that came out of that was the misinformation culture is still thriving. And so a lot of the violent videos that people saw on the internet, on Twitter in particular, were actually taken from, say, the George Floyd protests of 2020, or they were taken from other moments, or they were complete AI doctored to make it look like they were much more violent than they were. It is true that ICE was shooting reporters in downtown LA with rubber bullets. Now, these are people who were not even protesting. They were just doing their jobs to report on it. But on the whole, all the protests were very, very safe. They were very, very peaceful. I had no fear going out and protesting myself. For one thing, I think as a journalist, it's important for me to be there. But as a concerned citizen, I was as angry as everybody else. So I wanted to go out and say, you're not a king, and what's going on in this country is not acceptable. The city very much feels angry, and it feels galvanized in a way. We're not angry at one another. I think we're angry at the situation. And my hope is that feeling sort of spreads nationwide, that this is not acceptable, and we have every right to be angry, but we're not angry at each other, which is part of the problem, I think, leading into this situation.
I have so many questions for you, David. There was one thing about comparing 1.0 to 2.0. He utterly failed on the ban of transgender troops. The courts blocked him and basically said no. This time around, particularly the Supreme Court, basically said, yeah, go ahead and do it. I mean, the court really shocked me when they were like, yeah, go ahead, start removing trans troops from the military. We know that the case is still working through the lower courts, but just go ahead and do it. And it feels like this time around, they're just sort of giving him a pass. And the deadline, it's happening this month, right? Where they're going to start taking people out.
Yeah, and I think for one thing, the makeup of the court, and I think the mood of the country has changed. One thing we hear a lot about with the Roberts Court specifically is, particularly John Roberts himself, is very, very concerned with public opinion. And the public opinion of the court, he very much believes that the court should be a nonpartisan operating body. Now, this is also the man who voted to deny same-sex people their rights. He has voted to ban transgender troops from the military, and he voted to overturn Dobbs and for the Citizens United decision that have largely contributed to our current political climate. So, okay, Johnny, we appreciate your sentiment, but I think the court does want to be, to some degree, in tune with the mood of the country. And this gets into a much larger conversation, so I'm sort of loath to even bring it up. But I think opinions about transgender people have changed. Unfortunately, I heard Congresswoman Sarah McBride, in a conversation with Ezra Klein several weeks ago, where she talked about this, how trans acceptance was really kind of a mirage because the general public thought of trans people as being more like gay, bi, lesbian people, just sort of sexually queer people, not gender queer people. But to McBride's point, she made the excellent point that this is one community. These are two different ideas. Love is one idea, but when you ask somebody, a cisgender heterosexual person, to completely change their own concept of what their gender entails, which partially because of the existence of trans people, it's suddenly, oh, my sex and my gender aren't the same thing. Well, what does that even mean? Well, what do you mean I'm on a spectrum? Like, it's a bigger ask of people. And so I think the culture is still adjusting to these ideas and including trans people sort of trying to figure out where they fit in all of this. And because of that, we see the Supreme Court is also acting with I don't want to say conservatism, but they're also less likely to ally themselves with transgender people who are wanting to serve in the military. I shudder to think, the court has not ruled on sports, transgender people in sports, but I'm scared of I'm scared of what's going to happen when they take up that issue, and they will. And I think the best case scenario is you end up with a sort of checkerboard situation where states are deciding different things, but I think that's also going to lead to more problems later on.
It's interesting when you bring up that public opinion and Chief Justice Roberts, where you really do have two countries when it relates to trans folks, though. You have I'm in Minnesota, and we're based in Minnesota. We also air in Chicago, Illinois, and
Right.
These states have been very much trans inclusive. Minnesota's a trans refuge state. We're the opposite of Florida. Y'all in California, the opposite of Florida, where there are a lot of folks that are like, this does not affect me. It was like gay marriage. You know what I mean? There were a lot of liberals that were like, this does not affect me. I don't need to have an opinion about it. And when you could see Roberts pretending to care, sort of like Susan Collins saying, I'm bipartisan. Like, girl, you're not. And Chief Roberts, you don't care about it because you just constantly go for the MAGA most extreme position on this. Like, we never see them going the other direction. And I think there are a lot of folks, your governor, deciding that he's going to woo MAGA voters that aren't going to vote for him anyway. What the University of Pennsylvania did last week, I see red about that because it's such a dereliction of duty to your students and your alumni to throw a student an alumnus now under the bus like that. It is. I had issues where I'm going with this ultimately with that conversation with Representative McBride and Ezra, because Ezra's, I don't know what he's up to there, but also the New York Times is so blatantly anti-trans to begin with, and they keep giving a platform to anti-trans propaganda, which is not even real science, and then you see the courts relying on, well, here the liberal New York Times is saying this, and it's just creating this weird feedback loop that I think. I guess I want to know. I don't know. Maybe we can do that with public polling. How far the country actually is going in anti-trans stuff, like how anti-trans we actually are. I have to fit in a break though. I asked a huge question. Can we come back to that when we come back from the break? We're gonna have more with David Reddish, lead anchor and commentator of Occupy Democrats TV. You are listening to The Gailey Show on AM 950 KTNF and WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Welcome back to The Gailey Show. I'm your host, John Parker. We are coming up on the bottom of the hour, and we're in our Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly weekly episode where we sit down with a guest to take a deep dive into an issue facing the LGBTQ and allied community. We are looking back at the past 6 months with guest David Reddish, who is a member of the Society of LGBTQ Entertainment Critics, a member of the National Association of LGBTQ plus journalists, whose publications have been found in Screen Rant, Queerty, Movie Web, and Playboy. He is the lead anchor and commentator of Occupy Democrats TV. I talk for a living, and I'm just stumbling all over my words.
It happens to all of us, man.
But I think where I was, like, question I was going before the break here is that what is actually the depth of anti-trans hatred? And I think that there are two countries on this. Sort of, if you want to go back to John Edwards, there are two Americas. Where we have states like Minnesota, where we had trans athletes competing for like 10 years in sports without incident. Like there weren't people going, oh my God, there's sexual predators in the locker rooms, and oh my God, this is so grossly unfair for the 5 athletes that were competing in a given point in time. But it just feels like we're giving more credence we're giving more airtime, more column inches, there's a newspaper term, to the anti-trans folks and the propaganda, the cast review and all of that. Whereas the positive stuff it's just sort of mentioned casually and then, okay, move on to the other things. You know what I mean? Like, it feels a little clickbaity to me, and we're letting a certain smaller group of the population, or maybe not a smaller group, but we're letting a population control all of the airwaves as it responds to it. But you are in the media. What is your take on that?
I mean, I think, well, there's actually a lot more to unpack there than you may even realize. My brother in the media. Look, I think, on the trans issues, because there's more than one issue, I think, around trans people. And I think part of what we see with anti-transness, or the sort of using it, as you say, as a wedge issue, is the fact that it's reported in the media to be one issue. And even when it's not, that's not necessarily the report that people read or that people watch.
Right.
It's easier in America. We like things to be very, very simple. We like yes, no. We like, black, white. We like binary choices, and we like them to be clear cut. I'm of the mind that, particularly when surrounding trans issues, that these are complicated, and so they really need to be looked at thoughtfully, and with nuance, and with good manners, because we already see what it's like when you don't use good manners, and it's like, the trans people just feel terrible, and other queer people feel alienated, and it's just ugly. It's ugly. It is. I think, and Sarah McBride, Congresswoman Sarah McBride, made this point in the interview I mentioned, that trans issues, when you break them down in trans people being allowed to be open, trans people having a right to healthcare, trans people serving in the military, trans people playing sports at the high school level, the professional level, what have you, there is a huge disparity between the approval. And it does a disservice to trans people, and I think to everyone else as well, to lump everything in and say, okay, where are you on the trans debate? Well, which debate are we talking about? There is no debate. Trans people exist. Like, you can't deny that at this point. Trans people have a right to exist. Certainly, they have a right to their health and safety as much as any other American does. So I think part of the reason we hear so much discussion around trans people in sports is because the science is not totally clear, and there is not a cut and dry answer around should trans people be playing sports with cisgender people, which, should they be playing on the girls team, the guys team? Should there be a non, like a co-ed team where gender is not in any way an issue? Opinions are all over the place on that. And that's because the science isn't totally clear at this point. And I think that may be because the science is just not clear, period. I think this is a complicated thing, and maybe we should look at an age where someone transitions versus, the way someone transitions versus where they were in their own sports journey. I think it may be an interpersonal thing, which is not what the American public's going to want. And I think until they come around to accepting, well, this is maybe a nuanced thing, and it's a mistake to have far-reaching policies on it, period. I think it's still, I think ultimately queer people are going to lose, because this is a losing issue, because you can't have a hard and fast rule for it. And if that's what the push is for, how do you add nuance to something that by nature cannot have that?
We are here with David Reddish, lead anchor and commentator for Occupy Democrats TV. I think also the science is playing catch up.
Yes,
like a lot of the reports that you see, I think the longer ones are like 2-year long studies. And it is but the thing that I think is really interesting is around there's this a concept of unfair, Governor Newsom, this is unfair. And I'm like, what's unfair? Left-handed fencers. What's unfair are left-handed footballers, real football, not American football. You know what I mean? Like, what's unfair are high school students, male, trans males, trans women who are 7 feet tall versus someone who's 5'8". You know what I mean? Like there are inherent physical advantages and disadvantages on bodies, because bodies are so they're variety. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, they're all over the place. There is no actual. I guess part of the problem for me when the science is coming back this or that is that I'm like, you're never, even right now, you don't have on par everybody having an equal playing field when it comes to, you know what I mean? Like, I remember watching the Olympics, because I'm obsessed with them, and they would literally, during the Summer Olympics, would like have detailed breakdowns of Michael Phelps' body. You know what I mean? His wingspan, how tall he was, like how his muscles here were so much better, you know, because he had this muscle group that was more, you know, trained or whatever compared to these other swimmers. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? Like everybody has physical differences and advantages. But anyway, I'm being, to your point, being sucked down this rabbit hole when there are other, you know, issues that are pressing right now for folks. It's one thing before I leave the area that I thought was really provocative was, and this is for all trans, like all of these issues that are being debated right now, is that there was who wrote it? I'll see if I can find it and put it on Blue Sky. But they were talking about, this is bad journalism. I can't remember who it was. They were talking about how, you know, in 2004, everything felt lost on gay marriage because there were all of those state, you know, constitutional amendments, and it just felt like the door was slammed shut. But then 9 years later, you know, there was all of that organizing, and then we got the Supreme Court decisions, both of them in Windsor and Obergefell. And, you know, there is that, is this right now going to launch us into a new era where for the next 9 years, we're going to have even more effective organizing on behalf of the community? That does not in any way mitigate the harms that are doing right now, but it was interesting organ question to put to us. I have more questions for David about the past 6 months and how we can look forward to getting through the next 3.5 years. We have to fit in a break here. None of this is possible without our generous advertisers and sponsors. So listen to this upcoming break. Thank them. Tell them that you heard about them on The Gaily Show right here on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk, where facts matter. Coming to you from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and airing on WCPT 820, Chicago's progressive talk. Welcome back to The Gaily Show, the only daily LGBTQ progressive radio news and talk show in the country. I'm your host, Sean Parker. It is about 33 minutes after the hour. It's our weekly Thinking Clearly, Thinking Queerly episode, where we sit down with a guest for the episode to help us think more clearly and more queerly on the major issues of the day facing the queer and allied community. Today, we're talking about the last 6 months, and as we look ahead to making it through the next 3.5 years of this neo-fascist administration. My guest is David Reddish, who is the lead anchor and commentator of Occupy Democrats TV. He is also the entertainment co-host of the Left of Straight show, a Rotten Tomatoes accredited critic. He is also the author of The Passion of Sergius and Bacchus and the Sex, Drugs, and Superhero series. David, okay, on top of everybody's mind right now is the big, ugly, what I call the big, ugly suckers bill that passed and was signed into law last Friday. Tell us about, you know, your views and reporting on what this bill is going to do to us all.
It's probably going to hurt. I mean, I think for most of our listeners, depending on where you are in the country. Yeah.
We've been liberated. It's amazing.
Well, in a sense, it's liberating. You know, I live in California. We're the fourth largest economy in the world. And I love when I hear people say, well, I don't want to pay for your health care. I don't want to pay for your food. You know, I don't want to pay for poor people to do whatever. It's like, well, first of all, there's nuance to this and you don't know what you're talking about. But secondly, the fact is California pays for just about everything for the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. And so it's rich to me that these people are fine to take our money and then say, oh, we need to give ourselves a tax break as a, you know, but the tax break is somehow in the name of we shouldn't have to pay for anybody. But okay, fine. The bill is an abomination. I remember when Trump passed his first tax bill in his first term, which was maybe the only true achievement beyond Supreme Court justices that he actually had. And my dad and I talking about it, and my dad, who is generally fiscally conservative, was like, this is an abomination. Like, this is disturbing how big a tax cut it is to big earners. I mean, it's people are going to go hungry because of this. I'm not going to say any names. I've known many people who grew up on public assistance, including SNAP or food stamps, which is what we usually called it when I was a kid, who are now upstanding adults who make a good living, who have been to college, who are good people. And I really shudder to think at the idea that they would have starved in today's world, in today's country, because we want to cut SNAP programs. As I mentioned, earlier, the way this is going to hurt, not Medicare. My brain is dying.
Medicaid,
it's going to hurt
hospitals.
Medicaid. Thank you. Good Lord. My blood sugar is dropping. The way it's going to hurt Medicaid and the way it's going to hurt people in rural areas specifically is going to be really, really ugly. It's hard for providers to make a decent living in rural areas, in part because there just aren't as many people and they can't therefore have as many patients. But it's also hard to sort of pool the resources for a really good hospital or healthcare center if there's not the population to support one. And so a lot of everything from urgent care clinics to hospitals get federal dollars that are now cut. And so it's like, well, what are people going to do? Say, oh, you've lost an arm, here's some aspirin, go home. I mean, I before Obamacare passed, and that may sound absurd, but before Obamacare passed in whatever that would have been, 2010, a friend of mine had a brain tumor, and this was in California, and he could not get treatment for it because of the complexity of his income and because, he lived with his family or whatever the reasons were. He finally was able to have an operation to have it removed after he was able to get insurance because of the Affordable Care Act. I fear a lot more situations like that where when he would go to the doctor and say, I'm in pain, I'm going blind, they would give him aspirin and they would send him home. And I feel like there's going to be a lot more sort of placebos passed out, say, here, take an aspirin for your kidney failure or your cirrhosis of the liver and go home. This does not get into the issue of food deserts. The fact is the bill is not really addressing any true problem that the United States has. If anything, it's going to exacerbate those and allow people who already have incredible amounts of money and are able to insulate themselves from all other society's woes or think they can insulate themselves that way. It's going to allow them to just pad out the walls a lot more while the rest of us suffer and try to pick up the slack and try to find ways to address this. It's really gross. My hope is that it allows the Democrats to retake both chambers next fall, but a lot of the cuts in the final bill will not go into effect until after the midterms. And that, of course, was by design because they don't want to be hurt in the midterm elections.
I'm here with David Reddish, lead anchor and commentator of Occupy Democrats TV. Over the weekend, I was reflecting on the moment, and I was trying to think of, and I'm not a historian, so it was extra hard for me to do this, but even looking back at politics here in the U.S., typically we vote for people who are going to do something for us. And I think
they are,
yes, improve in some way our way of life, or what we expect is going to be improving their way of life. I have never, and before there was sort of this stasis, I feel like, with Republican voters, particularly in rural areas, and I'm saying that because my dad's side of the family, all rural areas. I split my time between Northwest Wisconsin and Minnesota. There is not a neurologist. I have epilepsy. There's not a neurologist in 90 miles of where we live. Right. So I'm like, I'm not changing my residency to Wisconsin because then I'll be stuck on Wisconsin insurance and there's no one. But this seems weird to me. It's a weird moment where they are literally, the majority of MAGA anyway, saying, take stuff from me and I'll cheer you for it. Take away my health insurance. Take away my food benefits. Destroy the healthcare system that will have ripple effects when we start tanking Medicaid. Please, yes, sure, take away my taxes on Social Security. Never mind that it's going to help bankrupt the system by 2032. It's this weird situation where a political party is literally taking, and the followers are thanking them for it. And I'm just having such a hard time of thinking of another moment of history. Like under Bush, it was like, yeah, I'm going to do things for you. He didn't do anything, but there was this weird stasis in rural economies where nothing was getting better, but people were leaving those towns. So they were shrinking.
Yes.
But now it's literally like, yes, take things from me and I will thank you for it. Am I wrong about that?
I mean, I think what you're describing there is a symptom of something that is endemic to the country and always has been. It's just it's much more obvious right now. I believe it was Mark Twain said, and I don't have the direct quote, so I'll paraphrase, that the United States is populated only by millionaires, most of whom are down on their luck. In other words, which is to say, I hated his writing. I hated Huckleberry Finn so much, but the man was funny and he was a brilliant essayist. I think all of that is to say Americans don't like to think of themselves as poor. That's part of why we cling to the idea of the image of the land of opportunity. America very much is that, but we tend to think of that as, oh, anybody can be a millionaire. Well, in theory, that is possible, but that doesn't mean it can work in practicality. In fact, by definition, I don't think it can. Not everybody can be a millionaire in this country. People don't like to think of themselves as being poor because, in my view, this is where I get controversial, man. So brace yourself, right? I think in the United States, in the 21st century, and I have evidence that this goes back all the way to the beginning, there is nothing we hate more in this country than poor people. And we hate the concept of being poor. We have the image that poor people are poor because they're stupid, or because they're lazy, or because they're suckers and losers, to borrow a phrase from our president. And we cannot bear the idea that we're not at least middle class. Everybody is middle class. And if I can't afford things like a home or insurance, it's because no one's helping the middle class. It's not because we're poor. And we don't want government handouts because that, the people that take those are poor. It is this weird sort of paradoxic mentality that prevents people from actually improving their own lives. The United States would benefit immensely from having a single payer healthcare system, but we can't stand the idea that we might benefit from some form of government assistance. And we can't stand the idea that, oh, maybe we're helping poor people, and not out of the kindness of our hearts, not dropping, $10 in the bucket with the guy with the bell and the Salvation Army at the Christmas, we're taking some money out of our paychecks, a minuscule amount of money that will reduce the cost of healthcare for each and every one of us personally, but will also allow people who can't get healthcare any other way to actually have it. We can't stand the idea that we're in this together and that we might be poor. And I think that's part of the reason why Trump is popular with lower class, low earners. That's one of the big shocks to come out of this election, right? That he did really well with working class or low income people. But I think that's because they see him as aspirational, as, oh, the rich guy, he got rich, he's going to teach me to be rich. So I don't mind if he cuts my programs because I'm going to be making all kinds of money once the economy improves and I can be a millionaire. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's anything more complicated than that. It is kind of this weird solecism, this weird delusional image, because we all want to feel like we're responsible for our own good, for our own healthcare. We don't want to think we depended on anyone else. We want to all be self-made millionaires, which is, that's part of the American myth as well. And so people don't mind the idea of having their healthcare cut or their food assistance cut, because then they're going to be a millionaire once the economy improves. And that's not how this game is played. Really, what's going to happen is life's going to get much, much harder for everybody, except for the people at the top, who will then be able to take all the money they have pulled out of social safety nets and put into their own pockets. And they will be able to inject that into politics. So we end up with more psycho conservative Republicans who are going to continue this kind of budgeting for the foreseeable future.
MAGA is absolutely obsessed with Hungary, the country.
Yes. And,
they want to do all the things that Hungary is doing. Yes. And I'm like, who has universal health care? Hungary.
Yeah.
The dictatorship in that party has been there for like 10 years, and they're not dismantling it. They've actually been investing in the program because it's not performing. They're losing doctors who are leaving to other countries in the EU. And so they've been investing in the program to make it better.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, how about that? So it's not left-wing extremism.
Well, I mean, people don't think about that. I think if you confronted a MAGA voter with that, they would either say, well, I don't want to pay for somebody else and I shouldn't have to, which goes to my earlier point, right? But I think they would also say, well, we're a diverse country. Our country's too big. It's too diverse. And there are all kinds of weasel words in that statement, aren't there? About, well, what do you mean we're diverse? Why is that a problem? What are you talking about? And it's always, well, I don't want to pay for the people who don't look like me, who I think are lazy and stupid, and that's why they're poor. Which again speaks to my earlier point. In the case of Hungary, I'm glad you brought this up because this opens up a whole other ball of wax. But I think part of the reason why MAGA voters are beholden to a place like Hungary, or especially Russia, I think this is the reason why you have suddenly all these pro-Russia, pro-Putin Republicans. And it's like, Reagan is spinning in his grave, man. And I hated the man, but he's right to be spinning. They like the idea that a place like Hungary or Russia is still, it's not true, but the image that people have is that these are all white countries with low immigration, because who wants to live under an authoritarian dictator, really? And they respond to the authoritarianism. I think Republican voters have always had this sort of sympathy, call it, to authoritarianism. They like strong, decisive leadership. They like a president who's going to say, the heck with all the rules. We're just going to do whatever I want and stuff's going to get done. And that's, of course, what autocrats do. That's what Putin does. That's what Orban in Hungary does. And that's what Trump tries to do here, and unfortunately has been getting away with over the past 6 months.
This is why I wanted to have you come on the show, David Reddish. You can connect with him on Instagram. He is at The Gay Magneto. Tune in to David's reporting on youtube.com/@Occupy Democrats YouTube. You can stream Left of Straight everywhere you get your podcasts. Thank you, David, for being on the show. We've got one last break to get to. Still lots to get to on The Gaily Show. Welcome back to The Gaily Show. I'm John Parker. We're coming up on the top of the hour. I close out our Thinking Queerly episodes with a weekly essay series called A Queer in the Cosmos. You can only find it here on The Gaily Show. Here is the latest essay. Lightyear 18, Who Are We When We Travel into Space, Part 2. In my last essay, I asked a big question based on the observations of Nelly Ben Hayun Stepanyan, who has said that queer people should be the first to return to the moon because, quote, we are the ones who can express ourselves in ways that will make us much more adaptable to space. And Nelly is vice chair for the Cultural Utilization of Space, a member of the IAF Space Education and Outreach Committee, and a permanent committee member of the International Academy of Astronautics Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And exploring the practicalities of putting a large group of humans in a spacecraft for a long period of time reveals much of who we are and queer life here on Earth, which is why I'd like to explore this. On the International Space Station, those missions last roughly 6 months. 7 astronauts can live there. There are a lot of practicalities that go into that, which is an essay for a later date. But if we take 50 or 100 or 1,000 people into space, there will be a breakdown of power relations. With no contact with Earth, no one on Earth can enforce anything. There will be no government to enforce national identities, no state deputies and sheriffs to police gender, sexuality, or race. All of the nation-state institutions granting power and privilege to a select few will be utterly gone in the vastness of space. In our fiction, and currently in our reality, we rely on a top-down military structure in space. There's a captain or a commander who has ultimate authority. Below them are officers of various ranks, and depending on the science fiction writer, there are variations of democratic processes. Some captains are elected, others have larger institutions who confer authority onto them, and those institutions are democratically elected or have oversight from democratically elected governments. This is how it's done in our current space travel because it is within the confines of Earth's gravitational field. Those authorities have powers of enforcement. But once you get outside Earth's gravitational field, those astronauts, those people traveling throughout the cosmos, will have to enforce any type of governing structure on themselves, by themselves. As I pointed out in my last essay, queer people are going to have to fight to get onto any interstellar spacecraft. MAGA, nationalists, Nazis, far-right politicians will do everything they can to make sure queer and trans people are not on there. They will expect, even demand, that straight cis white men captain the mission. They will be skeptical but amenable to people of color and women because we're more accustomed to seeing diverse scientists and astronauts. We have a long way to go before there is racial and gender equity, yes, but there'll be less of a fight and maybe not even a fight. Queer and trans people, on the other hand, if we consider that this hypothetical space mission will be funded by countries who already use military command structures for their space missions, then we can just look to their arguments, MAGA neo-Nazi arguments, for why to keep queer and trans folks out of the military. Their primary argument is unit cohesion. The Heritage Foundation outlined this argument around don't ask, don't tell, and repealing it when they said we shouldn't because while cohesion requires a strong degree of mutual affection, sexual emotions are rooted strongly in self-interest. They can be distracting and even disruptive and often lie beneath the surface, not indicated by any overt action or statement. And the current U.S. Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, claims that repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell is the Marxist agenda, quote, and, quote, social justice tinkering that weakened the Army. He claims many people who originally supported the repeal now regret it, he being one of them. But the reason why queer and trans folks should be on these interstellar space missions and why I support Nellie's assertion is that out in the cosmos, that spacecraft, that ship will need to be a safe space. Oh, I can hear the howls now. Social justice, Marxism, the spacecraft won't be American, Jesus won't be in charge, but the devil. But none of those astronauts will have the power of a government with its legislation, courts, executives, polices, and armies. The only thing they will have to create their humanity in the cosmos will be their cultural values, beliefs, and yes, biases and prejudices. And yes, queer and trans folks have biases and prejudices. And they will only have their arguments to get the group as a whole to practice and uphold those values and beliefs. Whatever violence needed to enforce them will have to be their own. If they want to prevent two lesbians from partnering, they will have to do it themselves. The violence they will have to use to prevent someone from transitioning will have to be their own. A considerable amount of time, energy, and people will be required to do this, and it will essentially become a dictatorship. And in dictatorships, everyone's freedoms are limited because even those who are privileged by it are constantly forced to comply with it or risk being subjugated themselves. They don't have the freedom to create, to think for themselves, to innovate, to imagine, to evolve. But instead, the spacecraft could be a safe space. It would have to be intersectional, which is to say all of the many layers of our identities, race, gender, sexuality, ability, have to be acknowledged. It would be naive to assume that racism, sexism, heterosexism, etc. will magically fall away the farther humans are away from Earth. That will need to be fostered. And an intersectional safe space can do that. And if it is safe, then one can be oneself, can speak to their own fears, their challenges. They can be free of violence, physical, emotional, and spiritual. A safe space is a site of unlearning and letting go. Much of the work of a safe space is a place to work on oneself, to heal from internalized homophobia and transphobia, internalized racism and sexism and ableism. A safe space is a space of actualization, understanding and loving, and celebrating who you are as an individual. Isn't that what we will need in the cosmos? A space that will foster our sense of humanity? An intersectional space is also about chosen family. While the practice of chosen families is found in a variety of cultural communities, it is something all queer people have had to create for generations. For queer people, their biological family, especially the nuclear family, often fails, even the most meaningful ones. Queer folks have all had to learn the practice of creating bonds beyond their partners or marriages, to find the people who will take you to a hospital when you're sick, who will celebrate holidays with you, who will support you through a job loss. And through that, we need an intersectional, safe space in the cosmos, but maybe also here on Earth to allow for the collective imagination of what humanity could become and the liberation of the cosmos. Coming up next on AM 950 Radio is the Matt McNeil Show. Up on WCPT 820 is Choose Views with Richard Chu. And until tomorrow, keep it queer, America.